Welcome back to our third and final episode of Healer Build Breakdown, where I'll be doing a deep dive into ESO's meta healer builds. My goal is not just to give you the what, but the where and the why we do the things the way that we do. Since this is a pretty advanced build, we will assume you have a good bit of healing experience when we explain these things. My name's Doc, your host for all things healing, and in this video we'll be covering the Spell Power Cure Pillager's Prophet build, otherwise known as the Ulti-Gen build. So let's just go ahead and get right into this. So the goal of the Ulti-Gen build is not only to generate a ton of ultimate charge for yourself, but also to generate a ton of ultimate charge for your teammates as well. Spell Power Cure doesn't really affect our ultimate charge that much, but it's the best support set in the game, in my opinion, so Spell Power Cure is here to stay. Our actual main ultimate generation comes from the Nightblade class and the Pearls of Elnafay Mythic, which will give us a ton of charge very quickly. Keep in mind though that the Pearls of Elnafay only generate ultimate when your highest maximum resource is below 50%, so we'll talk about ways that we can make that easier as we go along. Then, Pillager's Prophet allows us to give some of that ultimate charge to our teammates whenever we cast our own ultimate, leading to constant ults and high Warhorn uptime. Don't worry, again, I'll explain more as we go along. For now, let's just talk about the specifics of the build. So, for race, like I always mention, I pretty much exclusively use Bretons for the sustain boost. However, since this build will want you to try to keep your sustain a little on the lower side, I can also recommend using other races like Argonians, High Elves, Dark Elves, and Khajiit. When it comes to class, ideally you'll want to be on a Nightblade. While this build can technically work on any class, the Nightblade's passives will give us a huge boost in ultimate generation, meaning this build will be a good bit weaker on other classes. For our attributes, you'll want all 64 into Magicka for the heal/damage scaling and resource management. For our Mundus, you have a few options. I personally use the Ritual for the extra healing, especially because the Pearls of Elnafay requires us to be below 50% Magicka. We're not really going to want to over-sustain or anything like that. Of course, though, if you do feel like you are really just super under-sustaining, the Atronach Mundus is available for you to use. So for our food, like we mentioned previously, I am usually going to prefer foods that affect both health and magicka. So, as always, we'll want the Clockwork Citrus Fillet found from completing Brengolin's questline in the Clockwork City Outlaws Refuge. Provides us with some max health, some max magicka, as well as an increase to our max health and magicka recovery. I will say though, again, like we always mention, it's easy to get, but costly to make. This is why I tend to use Witch Mother's Potent Brew instead. You can buy it from guild traders, so nice and easy to get. And the only ingredient that you may need to go a little out of your way to find is some Nightshade, and that's really not too hard to come by. It gives similar stat bonuses to the Citrus Fillet, even if it isn't quite as strong. Now I know we said we don't want to over-sustain, however, we also don't want to under-sustain as well. So I would still recommend some of these foods, even if they do give a little bit of extra magicka recovery, because, I mean, we do still need some magicka recovery, right? And for potions, I'd recommend running some heroism potions to get some extra ultimate generation. If you wanted to, you could use something like Tristat or Magicka or whatever, but in my opinion, heroism is definitely the best for this build. Up next, we'll talk about champion points, and those will be pretty much the exact same as other builds, but I'll go ahead and re-explain them in case this is the first part of the series you see. For our blue CP tree, you will want From the Brink. It will give our allies a huge damage shield if they fall below 25% while you're healing them. Ideally, you'll always have some sort of heal over time constantly ticking, so they should get the shield pretty much instantly, usually before they fall to 0% health. Next is Swift Renewal. This is going to increase the amount of healing that our heal over time spells do. Again, like we mentioned, we want to have a heal over time up pretty much at all times, so this will do the bulk of our healing for us so that we can focus on other things. Soothing Tide, this is going to increase the amount of healing that our AoE heals do, and you'll want this for pretty much the exact same reason as Swift Renewal. AoE heals are constant passive healing that helps keep your healing be more proactive than reactive, and of course, both heal over time effects and AoE heals are going to be fantastic options for keeping spell power cure up. And then finally, Enlivening Overflow or Hope Infusion. And this will sort of just depend on team composition. Ideally, you'll want one healer on Overflow and one on Infusion. Enlivening Overflow will grant you and or your team a pretty generous amount of recovery to all three resources whenever they're being overhealed. And Hope Infusion will grant minor heroism, granting some ultimate for you and your team anytime you heal someone below 50%. I would just coordinate with the other healer, see what they're running. It doesn't really matter which of the two you run on whichever healer. For our red CP tree, you will want Boundless Vitality, and like we always mention, you cannot heal people if you are taking a dirt nap. This will give you some extra health as a cushion in case things go sideways. If you happen to be a warden using this build, I mean, ideally you'll be on Nightblade, but if you happen to be on a warden, this perk is even stronger since you also get the minor toughness buff from wardens. Next is Fortified, and very similar to the last perk, Fortified will increase our survivability by giving us some extra armor. Like I mentioned before, a dead healer isn't a good healer. So between Boundless Vitality, Fortified, and your own healing, you should be pretty hard to put down. Next is Rejuvenation, and this will give you some extra magicka, health, and stamina recovery. While stamina and health recovery, not super important for healers, it's nice to have. And the magicka recovery is great for healers, and even though that, again, right, we want to keep our recovery in a relatively low spot so that we can keep Pearls of Elnathay procced, Rejuvenation is not going to give us so much recovery that it's going to hurt the build. If anything, I think that it's a very nice sweet spot for the amount of recovery that we get. And then finally, we have our flex spot. Now, there are several options that you can run here depending on a few things. By default, I usually run Celerity or Spirit Mastery. Celerity will increase our movement speed, and Spirit Mastery will increase our revive speed. And while healers are not normally the ones going for reses, sometimes a healer can actually be in a really good spot to go for a res, especially in a trials setting where you have a second healer most of the time. If you happen to be a Templar running this build, this is even better since Templars already get a revive speed increase. Otherwise though, if you're running some sort of content that has a lot of crowd control, looking at you, Cloud Rest, Slippery or Expert Evasion are also fantastic options. And finally, for our green CP tree, like we always mention, it does not matter. You can run whatever you feel like. A lot of these slottables are going to change with Update 45, and like we mentioned previously, very few of them actually affect combat. Okay, and next let's talk about skills. So before I actually explain each individual skill, like we've talked about previously in our Rojo build, ideally you'll be on a Nightblade for this class, so our skills will be reflective of that. Again though, you can run this build on any class, so if you're not on a Nightblade, you'll just need to swap out the class skills with skills from your own class. Of course though, the other skills, the Restoration Staff, Guild, Undaunted, whatever, right? Those things will stay as they are. Okay, if you need any recommendations for those, if you happen to be playing another class, please don't hesitate to leave that comment down below, and I'll make sure to get back to you with my recommendations on an individual class level. Okay, let's actually talk about skills now. So, on our Restoration Staff front bar, we are going to start with Healthy Offering, a very strong single target heal that also grants you minor mending for 10 seconds, though I will say the biggest reason that we use this is for the transfer passive, which will give us a couple extra ultimate with a very short cooldown whenever we cast a siphoning skill. Next is Combat Prayer. If you're familiar with healing or the channel, then you will know Combat Prayer is on pretty much every healing build. It grants anyone it hits a burst of healing, minor berserk, and minor resolve. It's a fantastic skill. There's no reason not to have Combat Prayer on. Next is Healing Springs. This is a very strong AoE heal that can help contribute to your major courage up times. I use Springs because I find that the extra magicka recovery doesn't really hurt my ability to proc pearls, but the other morph of this skill is also totally fine, just kind of comes down to personal preference. Next we have Energy Orb, a slow-moving but very good AoE heal that can really contribute during a heal check, and of course the synergy for this is even better, which will restore a pretty good amount of magicka or stamina, making it really useful to throw at your tanks. Next is Radiating Regeneration, a fantastic heal over time skill that will help keep our teammates topped off and be our main way of continuously proccing spell power cure. Since SPC relies on overhealing, pretty much every tick of this ideally should be refreshing the major courage buff, which will give the team a pretty large damage increase. Okay, and for our first ultimate, we have Soul Harvest. So this is a skill that we are, never going to cast. The main reason we have it slotted is for the Hemorrhage passive, which will grant your teammates minor savagery whenever you deal critical damage. On our Destruction Staff back bar, we are going to start with Siphoning Attacks. This is a fantastic sustain skill that will help keep you alive and have a stronger control over your resources. It also procs the transfer passive as well, so it's a nice skill to have for that as well. Next is Elemental Blockade, another very, very common healer skill that we'll see. The main reason that we're almost always going to have this on our back bar is so that we can proc our back bar enchantments. There's also the chance that it applies an elemental debuff to the enemy as well, so that's pretty nice. Next is Overflowing Altar, and this skill will apply minor lifesteal to all enemies in its pretty generous range, and it essentially acts as another small little heal over time for your team. Of course though, the main reason that most people run this is for the synergy, which is fantastic for tanks, helping them restore 65% of their max health. Oh, and one last thing to mention with Overflowing Altar, like we mentioned in the previous video, only one healer needs to actually have this slotted at a time, so just, coordinate with your fellow healer to see if, maybe you or the other one wants to run a different skill. Next is Refreshing Path, a very strong AoE heal that also gives your allies minor intellect and minor endurance while they're standing in it and for a few seconds after they leave it. And one of the biggest reasons that it is one of my personal favorite skills in the game is that it also grants major expedition, giving your teammates lots of zoomies, making it ideal for speedrunning. Next is Echoing Vigor, another fantastic heal over time skill that costs stamina instead of magicka. This skill, like Radiating Regeneration, will help keep our teammates topped off and contribute to major courage uptime. And finally, our back bar ultimate, Aggressive Warhorn. Probably never saw this one coming. When you cast this ability, all teammates in a pretty generous range will receive a 10% increase to their max magicka and stamina for 30 seconds, as well as gaining major force, which increases critical damage by 20% for 10 seconds. It is the quintessential healer ultimate. Pretty much every healer build's going to recommend it, and for very good reason, as you can tell. So make sure you got it slotted. And finally, we will talk about our sets, traits, and enchantments. Some of the setup will be a bit more complex from previous builds, and we are going to assume again that you've got a good bit of prior knowledge, so just bear with me. For our front bar set, quote unquote, air quotes there, you're going to want 3 body pieces and a restoration staff of spell power cure. Found in the White Gold Tower dungeon, this is the set that will give your teammates major courage whenever you overheal them, which gives you and your allies a pretty hefty weapon and spell damage buff. The weight will of course be light because this set is only available in light. For the enchantments, we'll want all max magicka for the extra sustain and scaling. For the traits, we'll want Divines, which will increase our Mundus stone effectiveness. Like we've mentioned in previous videos, I am also partial to using the Infuse trait on the large body pieces, meaning the pieces that have a higher defense and enchantment scaling. When it comes to the Restoration Staff, you'll want the Powered trait for higher healing, and any enchantment you want. I tend to use either Absorb Magicka or Berserker, but pretty much anything is totally fine. For our back bar set, air quotes again, or in this case, your destruction staff, rings, and 2 body pieces, you'll want Pillager's Prophet. Found in the Dreadsail Reef Trial, this set will provide your allies with a generous amount of ult charge whenever you cast your ultimate. The amount you give them depends on how much charge you have whenever you cast your own ult, so ideally we'll want to try to hit maximum ult charge before we pop our own. For our jewelry, we'll want the arcane trait to increase our max magicka, and enchantments can be spell damage. However, if you're ideally on a Nightblade, I would recommend considering the potion cooldown enchantment for your jewelry. As a Nightblade, one of your passives will give you some ultimate whenever you drink a potion, so being able to drink them faster will only further your ultimate generation. Our destruction staff will want to have the infused trait with the crushing or weakening enchantment. Element isn't super important, but I've got a video on the channel covering that in depth if you are curious. Next, we'll move on to our 2-piece monster set. For this build, I like to use Symphony of Blades, which can be found in the Vet Depths of Malatar dungeon. This set will restore magicka and stamina to someone you heal whenever they're running low on their highest maximum resource. For the weight, I like to go with 1 medium and 1 heavy for the Undaunted passive. Finally, we have our arena weapon or mythic item, and the main item that we'll need for this build to work is the Pearls of Elnafay mythic necklace. This is found through acquiring and scrying the appropriate leads, and it gives you 3 ult charge every time you cast a healing ability while below 50% of your highest maximum resource. It doesn't seem like much, but if you can consistently keep your magicka below 50%, you will get a lot of ult very, very quickly. And there we have it. That is the conclusion of our healer build breakdown series, at least for now. If a significant shift in the meta happens, of course I'll create a new guide, but for now, we've covered all of ESO's meta healer builds. As always, I hope you enjoyed and found the video useful. Let me know which of these builds is your favorite and if you're working on recreating any of them. I've still got another build video that I'm working on that I'll be putting out later this weekend. More of a casual, fun, enjoyable, focused healing build. But, we'll get to those whenever we get to them. Thank you as always for your continued support, and I think all I've got left to say is that I've been Doc. Take care of yourselves, be good to others, don't forget to pop those heroism potions, and I will catch y'all in the next one.